It's posted and ready to go.
Thanks, Linda. David, do you want to go ahead and start maybe? I don't know. We wait a couple minutes for folks or go ahead?
Well, I tell you what, why don't we start? Because by the time I finish blathering, then people will have joined us, right? So, okay, so good evening, everybody. So welcome to the session tonight. The format for tonight, just a couple of things as heads up, right? These were advertised as 4 to 6, but we are going to finish a little bit earlier tonight, probably around 5:30, just because this backs onto a board meeting. So just got to allow some time for changeover and so on. So we've sort of juggled the process a little bit. So it's going to be a combination tonight of sharing some of the results from the work to date with you from across the different task forces. Because what actually we think is emerging is this really interesting sort of story about sort of appetite for change across a number of different areas in Smithville. So we want to just give you a quick update on that. And then we have a few, and we'll do a little recap on where we got to at our last task force session a month ago. But then we have a few topics we want to really dig in a bit deeper with you, because we're really at this point of trying to translate sort of desire into very practical implementation in the comprehensive plan. And there are a number of areas where we want to really understand a bit more about, are we hitting the mark? And there's a few kind of inconsistencies that we want to probe out a little bit, right? So around how heavy-handed you want to be in the comp plan in terms of laying down guidelines and things like that, right? So it's going to be just a very honest sort of discussion is what we want to have. Did you want to add anything, Heather or Leslie, in terms of before I dive in?
Yeah, looking forward to talking with everyone today.
Okay, great. All right. So, and I'm going to share my screen, and I am going to probably shouldn't apologize for this, but I have about 20 slides I want to run through with you, right? Which are highlights of results to date, right? So it's going to be a little bit of a dump on you, right? But the point is not to remember all the detail of it, but is to kind of look for what's the sentiment that's emerging in the results that I want to show you, right? And because obviously all these results are being posted online, so you're able to see those sort of currently and after this as well. So let me just set up to share my screen here. And if you have any questions as we go, just jump in. Okay. All right, can everybody see my screen? We're good? Okay. All right, so obviously it's a small town feel and sense of community task force. Couple of housekeeping things. It's virtual, obviously. It is being recorded, so just be aware of that. It's also being live streamed on YouTube. So if you can help us out, and where possible, just mute your audio. If you're not speaking, that'll help cut down on some background noise. And if you do want to have a question, just pipe in, but I can't see you all because I'm sort of hiding your images, so I can at least see the screen to see what I'm showing you. So the program for tonight, just a bit of a quick recap on where we're at. As I said, the overview of the all 4 task force results and the community input. We want to have a little bit of discussion on that in terms of what you're seeing in that data. Then we want to, as I said, deep dive into a couple of remaining topics that we think need a little bit more validation with yourself as a task force on this topic area. You've seen this diagram. We're well down through this process now, right? Through character area projections, overlay topics, and really into the future land use map, and starting to draft significant sections of the comp plan. And the draft land use map and the draft character areas are up on the portal, so you can go and look at those. And we're at the phase of engagement where we're asking people to weigh in on this, have a look at it. There's pages there where you can contribute ideas or ask questions. It's also going to be at City Hall, and people will be able to drop in and be able to sort of query that as well. But just to, I guess you probably most of you understand this, but the character area and the land use map are sort of overlays. So the land use map is the underlying land use allocation by parcel of land. And the character areas is this concept of sort of distinct areas of experience or activity within the city limits that overlay on those land use maps. And I actually think the character areas has become one of the most exciting, not that land use maps aren't, right? But the character areas have become one of the most exciting ways to kind of help visualize and think about what the future kind of experience of these different areas of Smithville might be like. So task force results, these are from previous sessions. I don't know if you've seen these on the portal, but they're up there. There's the videos, the rapid polling results, and the slide decks. We've also been running this series of what has turned out to be really quite interesting community discussion topics. And we've got 8 of these 9 are up and posted, and people have been commenting on those. And you know, everything from sort of exploring downtown issues to gateways to corridor experiences to the community rec centre, potential for local foods and so on. And I think it's turned out to be a really nice way for people to sort of, in their voice, put their own comments. And I said it last night, but I really must take my hat off to the thoughtfulness of the amount of responses that we've had, both in the quality and the sort of depth of thinking that people have taken, or the time they've taken to be able to make their response. And they're going to continue to be open, and we're going to add some more as well after this round. All right, so let's talk about what's been coming out of the task force pillars group so far, right? So the business and economic development, you know, we really started with this notion of what are these demand drivers? So, you know, looking at enhancing tourism, leveraging airport redevelopment, targeting and attracting key industries, enhancing educational workplace. Sorry, just got to close that down. And revitalising the main street were the sort of major economic drivers. And we probed this at the last task force session to see what where people saw that there was priorities. And so the enhanced tourism, leverage the airport redevelopment, target and track key industries, and develop a vibrant downtown all came up as high to very high for investment of resources and attention over the next 10 years. And this is kind of going to be a theme I'm going to keep coming back to, which is what I keep seeing in the data, and I'm going to be interested in your view, is there's a lot of this willingness to be investing resources and attention and effort, right? And people know that that comes with, you know, staff time, board time, planning commission time, money, resources, all those type of things. But that 4 of those 5 came up as high to very high. I thought was kind of interesting. We also have been running a survey with the Business and Economic Development Task Force, the board and the Planning Commission to dig in a little bit deeper on this proposed industrial land use area. One of the questions we asked in this was, how important do you think it is to have dedicated industrial land zoned and available? And obviously the scale here is 1 down here and 10 up here, 10 being critically important. So everybody's skewing to some level of importance, you know, really sort of very to critically important to have industrial land use zoned and available. And the area that's sort of been proposed in the land use map and the character area is this area in what's called the 169 industrial character area. So that's 144th Street here, if you can see my cursor. And then 92 is up here. So there's about 100 acres that's been identified as perhaps suitable for an industrial land use property type. So it's, you know, surrounded by significant buffers, you know, it's got some access and so on. And what has been coming up through the different surveys is there is really a clear kind of appetite for the type of properties to go on there. And this is some of the data from the previous task force session where they, you know, saw that research and development would be a perfect land use for this area. And why we're probing in on this is that Leslie and John have done some analysis, and for a city like Smithville, in having proposed industrial land use available like this, or land area like this, what's the figure, Leslie, in terms of what percent would ended up being taken up by warehousing? Is it 83 or 84?
So we did 83% based on some top level market analysis comps of the types of industrial uses that are being developed in the region and in the greater area. What are those common patterns? And in our research, we found that, again, 83% of the recently completed industrial use developments are leaning towards that distribution and warehouse category.
Yeah, good. And so we wanted to probe that, right? Because we asked people to, given a range of different types of possible industrial property types, or versions, so telecom, data centers, research and development, flex, which is this sort of multi-use, animal health, bioscience, light manufacturing, warehousing, and so on. And this is a ranking in terms of most desirable at the top, least desirable at the bottom. And the red line is really where there's a break point, is that any of the ones that are above that on different metrics that we've asked in the survey would be appealing and would be perceived to add value to the community of Smithville. The ones that are below the red line, including warehousing, are actually seen to have some potential negative consequences. So, there's a sort of a running against the tide here, and that's part of what we'll definitely be exploring tomorrow night with that task force. Some of the other types of things are, we asked the question about how proactive. So how proactive should the city be in attracting the right kind of development? So if you think, okay, we're going to make 100 acres available, it's all we got, right? That's our one shot at it. Are we going to be really proactive about making sure we get exactly the right kind of development there? And are we patient enough to wait for that? Or does it become the first one that sort of comes along? And so we're asking about how proactive the city should be, which is, and the scale is, way down here is 1, let the market and developers decide. And 10, which is this column here, is very, very actively pursue and promote. So there's a real imprimatur or sort of authority being given here, I think, from this survey set to think about how to best use this industrial land area. So the recreation and connectivity task force, let me just talk about this just for a moment. Some really interesting high level stuff out of that. People love trails, right? That's well baked in from the surveys all the way through. People just love the trail system and want to see it expanded. 59% people saying they use it for recreation, 35% for connectivity, 6% for safety. This was a really interesting result from the task force in the July session. So the chart at the top here, we said, how much are the current and potential trail networks part of the future value proposition of Smithville as an attractive community? In other words, how much is this part of what defines you in a really interesting way and adds to your attractiveness for people who may want to come here? And everybody said it's a very key part of our future story and a key differentiator. And that got reinforced in a number of different ways. So that gave a lot of appetite, I think, for thinking about how to really maximize the potential of this as part of your sort of assets. So it sort of seems to sit right up there with, having a really high performing school district, there's almost like kind of that level of significance for people. Part of that, we think, is that you've got this whole potential. So here's the map of Smithville, Highway 169 down here. But most people and most activities occur to the east of that 169 corridor. And with the existing trails around the lakes, there's this potential to fairly easily, not without money or time, but fairly sort of from a planning sense, fairly easily be able to create this whole trail corridor that would allow you to get from one end of the city to the other and really not have to, fight the road with traffic or, actually having some, really amenable sort of access. And I think, not many communities actually have the luck of geography to be able to do that. And that given it, one side of it ties into the whole lake recreation area, and then you've got the downtown and all those connections, becomes a really exciting potential proposition. So it's something that we've been exploring a bit in the process. We did want to understand appetite, right? So it's good to have big thinking and stuff, but are we really willing to sort of, hunt down the possibilities? So we asked this question about the potential to create a unique trail and connectivity network, which has new resources available. How bold should we be thinking, right? So if you think about laying down the markers in a comprehensive plan, we want to know how bold does the community want to be, because we don't want to undershoot or overshoot. So in this case, just over half of the people said, be very bold, think big, out of the box, create something unique, right? And the other half, possibly more pragmatic, said create a workable integrated network of trails in a realistic time frame, 10 or 15 years. And that's really the predicted build out sort of timeline. But nobody's saying just do a basic job. Everyone's saying do a good job. Really, it's about how fast or how bold or unique do we want to be. In terms of an issue about, there's cheap ways to do trails, which you can just sort of stick them as a line on the road. But most people certainly saw that they would prefer to have a complete separation from the road network of trails, or a complete streets approach where there is some physical kind of separation and they're integrated in a sort of a sensible way. But that's consistent with all research on pedestrians and cyclists. The number one thing that they want is a physical separation from vehicles on roads. It just makes it very uncomfortable for people. We also, with this group, explored a little bit out tourism and things like food, because food's become a really important part of tourism experiences, and it's actually also a really important part of community experiences in today's world. And actually, you can have a look at the discussion topic that talks about local food, and it's probably the most populated discussion topic that we've been running at the moment. But at the task force, they did identify that culinary, for visitors and tourists alike, could be very important and create a great new niche in the community. And so there's a lot of appetite, pun intended, for this whole emergence of local foods. And we want to explore this a little with you tonight, right? To think about how big and interesting this could look, right? Because some people are just saying, oh, we want different kinds of restaurants. Other people are going further and saying we want the ability to be able to have, locally sourced food and really sort of build this great kind of sort of, farm to plate type of experience. So we want to dig into that a little bit with you tonight. We also have people about festivals and events, and you can see that, people are right into the music, the sports, the wine, the food, and so on. So there was some commonality there. Last night we had the neighbourhood and housing options. So we've been digging into these 5 distinct different character areas. So we did some more work last night, but the high level results so far. The bottom chart here talks about, well, this chart here is the population growth of Smithville 1990 to 2017, pretty much growing every year fairly consistently. The forecasts are that you could expect Smithville to continue to grow somewhere between 2.3 to 3% per year. Would be a realistic forecast that matches preliminary data in terms of building permits and so on, right? And that would add 3,500 to 4,500 new residents over the next 10 years. At the previous task force session, most people seem to think that the risk is to the upside, so that actually things could grow faster than those projections, although a third seem to think they're about right. And some of that was driven by the longer term appeal, but also perhaps a shorter term bump from COVID, where people are perhaps looking to get outside of some of these bigger cities. And we're certainly seeing that trend in places like New York and so on. How much that'll stick, we don't know yet, right? And but at least in the short term, there might be a bit of a bump. So it does raise this issue of how do you find space for this 1,500 plus or minus new dwellings that are going to be required. And so that comes into this whole issue of density, which we've been working a lot on. So there's this sort of north residential character area. We'll talk about that, but we heard very clearly last night that people want to see that retained very much as detached single family homes, and detached being the key word, Melissa, which is where we have individual buildings. And then obviously you've got the potential for greater density moving into the downtown community oasis. There's appetite for that in the Hospital Bluff area. Then obviously this 169 South character area, which is to the bottom of Smithville, that has come up in all the discussion so far as a targeted area for perhaps higher density mixed housing, and also some sort of professional office space and so on. But we'll talk more about that. So just quickly running through these, right? And then we want to get to the small town piece is, so the northern residential character area, which is this big chunk to the top end, which is where most of the single detached family homes are. When we talked about what should that feel like, and what should be the experience of that going forward? Because that's really what character areas are about, truly trying to articulate that. Most people talked about concentrating on, or focus on concentrated cluster development with a mix of housing, green space and amenities. And we dug into that a bit last night, thinking about that sort of trade-off between individual footprint of a property, maybe being slightly smaller, but having greater areas of shared amenities, you know, which might be, you know, the gardens and those sort of things, or community amenities. And people were fine with that, but the big ticker up here for a lot of people is about the single family detached. Coming into this larger sort of downtown community oasis, people really saw this wanting to be, this is kind of like if you think of the beating heart of the community, right? This is where all the fun is, right? So it's a broad, vibrant mix of historic downtown, mixed housing, green space, community amenities, you know, perhaps attractive to young professionals, live and work potential, certainly a lot of community recreation in this sort of broad area from the lake right through to the historic downtown. Then the 169 South character area, which is this sort of newly defined at the bottom here. We heard that people saw this as where could be ideal for having mixed live, work and professional space options, and that the feel of it would be a modern professional office park feel with clusters of high density housing, and we've probed that pretty well, I think. We did also ask about environmental considerations, and that has come up as important for people, that new developments should be thinking about environmental considerations, you know, across the levels of waste and materials and renewable energy, et cetera, right? So that's some of the high level stuff out of the other pillars. I now want to just drill it in a little bit into the one relevant to tonight, the retention, small town feel and the sense of community. So let's start with the beating heart of the community, right? So, and that's really trying to be defined in this concept of this downtown community oasis character area, which actually goes a chunk to the north, goes west of 169. So expanding that space and goes across to the lake, and with some proposals for some phased annexation of, from the park there. But trying to put together this package of land and options for the downtown, some commercial developments, some additional residential that might be a bit higher density, or mixed use sort of residential, some recreation spaces. Broadly, great support for it. Yes, great idea. 94% of people really seem to have gravitated to this as a way to create that sort of small town feel, a sense of community, a home, a place where the community comes together for community activities. In terms of specifically this green space here from the lake to the downtown and around that, a lot of interest in community-based like environmental education, recreation activities, but people particularly love this concept of this river walk, which could potentially go behind the downtown. And that really seems to resonate with people as a way to add real depth to that downtown, to sort of drag it off Main Street a bit into the sort of frontage of the river, create some sort of different areas for commercial development and so on. Lots of interesting discussion about that that we've had, as you well know. And part of your homework, right? So one of the data sets we saw last time that you polled was to, people said we want it to be classic and vibrant, right? So we set you the task to, between then and now to think about what classic and vibrant would look like. And we look forward to hearing sort of comments tonight. In terms of density, as we looked at this data, there's an appetite for an increase in density in the downtown. People know that there's need to have more perhaps sort of heightened depth there to get the sort of critical mass. And that's what it would look like, but that was what people chose. We explored things about the whole gateway into the historic downtown, really, really critically important junction there, comes up in every, and we're going to probe that more tonight with Leslie. That's a really, over and over, people say, how do we get people to turn right? Coming up 169, turn right and go into the historic downtown. We're also, with some of this proposed land use, we've also being able to think about how to have things on both sides of the road. So we asked people questions about what could be in this potential commercial area, what could be at this junction, which is very important. And I think we're starting to get some clarity around that. There's also a discussion topic on that as well. The whole 169 corridor experience, yeah, this is kind of one of those things I think it could be the blind spot, or it could have been, right, going into this, because, you know, we just drive roads day after day, right? And, you know, we've all been into any number of towns in the Midwest where you drive in and you drive through the whole lot, you know, car yards, all that kind of stuff. And it's just visual pollution through into, you know, to get to a nice bit. And so we really have been probing this question about how important it is to have a coherent plan to manage the visual experience on Highway 169. So we know that most people are traveling, you know, commuting in, and you want to, you know, if you think about where you live, you want to have this experience where you kind of like ease in, right? So if Smithville is a special place, you want to know that you've arrived there, first of all, and you want to be able to almost kind of relax into it, so that when you get there, you've already started the process of sort of, you know, absorbing yourself back into it. But obviously people said, yeah, that's essential. We need to address it. Now's the time to do that with development and things starting to occur. And we're going to probe that a lot tonight, right? And then of course there's the southern gateway entrance. Kansas City's coming up to you. How do you create that separation point between potential future developments and when you get into Smithville? And obviously people are seeing that it's really critical to create some full separation experience. How exactly we do that, we want to probe a bit tonight. The last piece too, before we go to some discussion, is there's the community recreation centre idea. We have a discussion topic that's just recently gone up. We asked the question about, you know, people, if you ask if they want it, people go, yes, we want it, right? If you say, well, it's going to cost you a whole bunch of money to build and then to maintain. And we're sort of probing, you know, there's a bit more. The task force members here, as you recall, 23% of people said it's critical to do it. 41% said be great, but not critically urgent. 23% think we don't need it within 10 years. And what we're sort of probing is, there's enough kind of understanding there that you really need to have a population of about 20,000 to have a significant sort of recreation community type amenity the way people are envisaging it. So you don't want to bankrupt yourselves to get there. So what we're sort of really asking is, how do we build steps that give you the amenities or the experience as you grow in population size and start to build, you know, perhaps a cluster of amenities that fulfill the need that people are articulating that's there, or is going to be there within any sort of reasonable time frame. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing the screen, right? So I want to just throw this open, right, so, to get your reaction to what's your takeaway from that bunch of data, right? And I'm sorry that was a dump on you, right? But that's, you know, there's a lot of really interesting stuff there. And what we're really interested in from a comprehensive planning point of view is trying to understand the desire for intervention and proactivity, right? And how much we lay that out in the comprehensive plan. So, and from our perspective, it looks like Smithville is going from a community that really, you know, not a lot of stuff was happening. And, you know, things that came along kind of just, you know, the bodies, planning commission, et cetera, just reacted to those, right? To where there's now a kind of a little bit of a, you know, an acceleration, right, of desire. It's like people are wanting a lot of stuff, right? And that means different sort of implications for city staff, for budgets, for planning processes, and so on, right? And so, and across the board, it seems that there's this kind of like sort of peaking kind of interest. So I wanted to throw it and allow you comment from the task force. As we scroll through that sort of data set, what surprises or jumps out at you about Smithville, or what's it telling you about Smithville relative to the comprehensive plan from the work we've done so far? Because there's a lot of engagement in that and some good data. So just going to throw it open, and we obviously want to hear your thoughts. So please, who'd like to start? You can just start talking with mute off. Stick your hand up if you want to. Yeah.
I'll start. I see there's a lot of interest in trails, and I respect that and appreciate that. You won't catch me on a trail though.
Right.
So how can we diversify a little bit of that interest to maybe the not, the non-trail people?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And because the task force is recreation and connectivity, right? And so recreation is broader than trails, right? It does really seem to be the topic that's jumped out. And I don't know whether that's sort of a little bit of the moment in time that we're in. I know we had people on the task force commenting they'd never seen so many people on the trails, right? And that's probably a function of people working from home and some of those things. Now, do we lose that intensity of use when we all kind of get back to, back on the busy wheel again? But I think that's a good point. We will probe that a little bit with that task force as well, right? So
I do like the trail aspect, because first place they're going to bring in the younger crowd and the younger people, and that's where our growth is probably going to be, and that's where we're going to build our base force of new workers with our youth. It's not overnight, but I like the trails. I don't want to deviate from it. It just not all of us are trail people. Yeah,
that's a good point. It's a good reminder too that, I mean, it's really interesting, right? Great value proposition, but that's not the only necessarily the game in town, right? And there's really two groups that I've seen really gravitate to. One is sort of young professionals, families, so people love it from that point of view. But as you well know, there's also an increasing sort of active retiree population going to be showing up in Smithville as well, and they particularly also seem to really enjoy the trail resource.
Yeah, I actually hear more from the active retiree than the younger folks just before this call even. So, and Marv, when you say you won't use a trail, I mean, if we connect Cedar Lakes to downtown with the Riverwalk, that's not necessarily a traditional trail through I mean, it's connectivity, right? It's still
right
making it walkable.
I think the trails are wonderful. Old Marv can't walk 100 miles on a trail.
Yeah, I got you. I
think it's unique. Yeah, I think it's going to be a unique feature that I don't know of anybody else around here. Somebody can prove me wrong that has something like that.
Yeah,
no,
I think when we're talking small town, the small town aspect of this, right? Because that's the task force that this one is, right? We start instead of talking more about the Main Street Trail is a small piece of a small piece of that's in downtown. The Riverwalk, the walkability of downtown, being able to walk from the square to La Fuente. There's no real way to do that right now. No easy way to do it. So how do we, like, if we're going to make downtown that whole area that's on the map, how do we make it, I've always told people I want downtown to not be one block, I want it to be 12. And that's kind of what we have on the map now, like a bigger core. So one of the things that I always think about is, places for people to live. And that's what we talked about yesterday, right? Houses and smaller houses or apartments above retail or even just luxury apartments.
So other thoughts on, what's your reaction to that, right? I mean, do you look at that and do you get excited by what people are saying about what they want? Do you see that as like, we're off on la la land? Because we're going to frame a comprehensive plan here, right? That's going to try and accurately reflect. So if you think we're kind of too far out on the skinny branches here, you want to let us know, or let us know that you like what you're hearing in the results, and you want to see that push through into the sort of the implementation and the comprehensive plan. So some thoughts on that, right? Alicia, I see you were nodding. So do you want to? Yes, smiling as well.
Yes. I have heard a few people that say that they think it's, it's always the more vocal ones who don't agree with it. I myself think it's awesome. And I drove through Parkville, which is probably 20 miles south of us, goes right along the river. And this was probably about a month before COVID hit. It was chilly outside, but still a pretty day. And we're talking hundreds of people on the trails down there, all ages, you know, elderly people wanting to walk for fitness, you know, families walking their dogs, strollers. So for anyone who's a naysayer, I would say drive through down there and see. And, you know, they don't even have anything really to connect to. It does go through, I think, their downtown Parkville, but I think even more so here, it would be even more popular once people gave it a chance and actually experienced it.
What's up, Josie?
Thanks. Say hi to Mayor Boley.
Hi.
Hey, so Parkville's a great one to look at too, because I spent a lot of time there as a kid. Their downtown now has they have some of the shops and stuff they've had, but they've got a permanent farmers market, overhang that they built that is connected to that Riverwalk Trail, the Riverfront Trail, and that's one that it spent a lot of last year underwater, right? So it wasn't even usable, but as soon as they got the sand back off it, it was people on it nonstop.
Okay.
And I think just to chime in on this too, because I think, Marvin, you bring up a really great point too on, maybe some of these things aren't for everybody, but when we think about how this relates back to that small town feel, I think one of the really key aspects that this trail idea has is that it gets people out in the community. And so much of that feel of community comes from seeing your neighbors and seeing other residents and familiar faces and that vibrancy as you're either driving through or sitting in your home looking out the window. And I think it's like an interesting idea too to think through, not just the trails as physical places to add value as you're planning land uses, but also as kind of that perception of vibrancy that the human element can bring in through activity or through having those places for people.
Yeah, I love the trails. I mean, let's don't deviate from that at all. Don't take away from it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a gold mine. It just
Well,
maybe throw some old folks trails in there.
Well, let's talk about. So that's one of the things we really want to think about too for the comprehensive plan is ADA accessibility, trailheads. Right, just a nonstop trail that is difficult, right? But if you have a place to park, a way to get to it easily, smaller sections, but we're talking about downtown, we're talking about small town feel and places to go and saying hi to people. If we don't develop anything along the trails in downtown and don't have businesses and places to live that people are going to be there, you're right, Marv. It's just going to be trails used for recreation. But if it's a apartment that backs up to a trail that leads to a small shop that you can grab a few groceries, then you have a story of why you want that walkability, not just a trail for somebody to ride a bike on or run or walk. Because we have those all over the lake.
And I think, if you do inviting little places to set, even for the older people, let's say, if they can walk just a short ways, but inviting with a bench and just some other little amenities along the way to make it, I don't want to say homier, but more inviting. That's important with it.
Yeah, Melissa's absolutely right. And that's when, as we're talking about like the Main Street Trail, even the businesses and places along that trail, that's what I've told them. Hey, put out a bench that information that somebody can sit down or welcome them to park in your parking lot to walk the trail or whatever.
Or maybe a shelter along the way where people can walk up and have a little picnic. They have a lot of those doing the lake trails.
Oh yeah. But as we try to keep this to the small town feel thing, like the little libraries, that kind of stuff too, I think would be part of that story of what makes it the small town feel.
Yeah.
Is it a bulletin board? Is it a lending library? Is it?
Yeah. So Whitney, you got your hand up.
One thing to appeal to the younger crew, teenagers, I feel like everyone wants an Instagram moment. So even like a mural of something where, you know, when you see that posted, that is Smithville. You know, I feel like every small town where I grew up, there was a huge mural and it was in the back of everyone's 4th of July pictures. Just a really good photo op. I feel like teenagers and social media then, people would be all about that, capturing that moment.
Yeah, actually, murals have come up a couple of points in the discussion boards and so on, where people have talked about that, you know, as a fairly easy step in the sort of creating that sense of history and character and sort of classicness in the downtown, is that some murals. I mean, you've got some nice big empty boards there, walls there, right? So, and those things are, you know, you really expect those in today's world, right? But you're right about them being an opportunity to get your, you know, photo taken with them as well. I want to probe on this. Yeah, sorry, Dan. Nope. I want to just kind of pivot a little bit here too, because I want to just because we're trying to sort of get this, you know, we're talking about this sort of small town feel and sense of community, and it's really defined by several things. You know, one is the vibrancy and the activity that occurs within it, right? But then, and the things that sort of stimulate that, right? So even murals and the sort of the visual kind of cues that we get. But there's also some really important sort of planning and architectural and design components that can create that sort of sense of community and, you know, sort of the sense of a small town. And I want to just show you some data, because there's a piece here that I think there's a slight inconsistency, I think, but I want to probe it with you, right? So I'm just going to share my screen again, because there's just 2 slides I want to show you, right? And then we can have a chat about it. Right. So this is from the community survey, right? And you may not be able to read all that, but basically we're asking people how important are various elements in helping maintain and celebrate the small town feel of Smithville's downtown, specifically in this case, right? So 1 down here, not at all important. 10, critically important, and it covered everything, right? So a lot of the things that we just talked about: public spaces, pedestrian-friendly atmosphere, storefronts, architectural designs, sidewalks, brick facades, community events, gateways, all that stuff, right? All the way down. And they all come out, you know, weighted average is, you know, close to 7 or to over 8, which means that they're all like off the charts important for people, right? And so obviously getting the combination right is part of helping create that really unique sort of downtown experience in this case. But when we asked this question, right, which was, how hard do you think we should push on creating specific character experience defined by design, architecture, and streetscaping? So actually baking it into the sort of guidelines inside of comprehensive planning, or in some of the, you know, limitations, restrictions. A, push hard and define clearly. B, provide general guidance. Let the market and developers decide. And 75% of people in this survey response said provide general guidance. And I'm not sure that those 2 charts are saying the same thing to me, right? So I wanted to test with you, because we obviously are wanting to make sure we get this right in the comp plan, is a lot of things you're talking about, because the danger is if you don't have some pretty clear guidance, you could end up with things that don't suit or don't fit, right? And once they're there for a fair while, right? As you well know, right? And so, you know, from a perspective of people who are really quite instrumental in this, in terms of, you know, your roles as board members and planning commissioners and stakeholders and task force members and so on, I want to just revisit that issue about guidance versus mandate, or, you know, frame that up. So what are your thoughts about that? Because it seems to me it's like really important to get this right and make sure the developments go the right way, but we seem to have a hesitancy about sort of boxing people in too much. And I just wanted to, Leslie, you may want to add in on this too, because I think this is a really key point to get the nuance right in the comp plan, and understand what's going in guiding principles versus what's going into kind of, you know, sort of defined requirements. Did you want to add, Leslie, to that?
Just to compliment everything that you said too. It's an interesting balance with that notion of what we're hearing over and over through these task forces is Smithville very much wants to help control your own destiny as a city and be cognizant of the types of developments that come and making sure that the decisions that are made in these developments that might exist for the next 20, 30, 50 years feel right for the community. So it is still that balance of, if you push too hard, you might scare away all development, and it might be way more difficult to develop in Smithville. And so the people that you want to attract might go elsewhere. But at the same time, what David said of where is that balance point too of making sure that you're able to see the things that you want to see every day, while providing that flexibility to the community that will come in.
Yeah, so can you help us a little bit on this one, right? So there's no right or wrong answer, I don't think, but we just wanted to, we're really using this second round to come back and just, test, I think, some of the things that we're hearing that, are we getting this right? So what are your thoughts?
I'll speak. Oh, go ahead, Carol.
Oh, well, I was just we've kind of been here before and had these conversations before. And I think that's probably where you see some of the hesitancy in that we want things to, we do want to guide the development and the way things look and feel. But there's also been a certain amount of pushback, and that at times can hinder the entire process. And so I think there's some hesitancy there. I don't think COVID helps things either. I mean, when people are told they have to do something, then they don't and won't do it at all. You know what I mean? And so I think people are just hesitant to say that we're going to require you to do things a certain way or require these kinds of guidelines. And I think that's where you're seeing some of the hesitancy.
Yeah, because it's interesting because it's your town, right? So you're asking, what we're probing here is, are you wanting to put guidelines that will have people who are essentially developers or prospectors or they may be locals that are investing as well, right? But at the end of the day, it's your town, right? And what we're trying to accurately reflect in the comprehensive plan is what you want as a community for at least the next 10 years, right? So I understand the sensitivity to it. How do we get this right? And the comp plan is the challenge. So Melissa, did you want to weigh in on this?
I think it's because I think going back to last night's discussion about pinning yourself in so tight to something, when we were talking about the detached single family residences, and started talking about when your elderly parent may need to come and live with you, can you change your house to accommodate someone else living in it, making it that, what was it, AUD or whatever that acronym was. I think that's where we're seeing a little bit more of that come in these two survey questions, is not tighten it so tight that then nobody wants to do anything. I think this is an area where you need a little bit of leeway in what is done, but yet understand overall what it needs to be. And I think it's just harder to do that with this.
Yeah.
Well,
oh, sorry, Mayor.
Yeah. No, I was to say, as you drive down Main Street from Second Creek to downtown, if you look, we've got a log cabin, a corrugated metal building, a bank, a double wide on stilts, and then a mishmash of whatevers. If we want to throw some sort of design spec in it, it doesn't have to be that tight, but a log cabin next to a corrugated metal building doesn't make sense. Right. A double wide that's elevated because they're flooding, and then next to all these other metal buildings, it just doesn't make sense. We've got standards now that are pretty decent, but if we go to a developer with renderings or go to investors with renderings, it's a better starting point than, well, you guys tell us what you want to build, your developer.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Mayor, and it's sort of very consistent actually with the discussion around the industrial land use property types, right? That if you just let it go to its natural flow, you're going to end up with something you don't want, right? And so how do you find the balance of guiding principles versus like locking it in and maybe locking yourself into a corner? And I guess the question probably is to the to the board and the planning commission is, how much do you think you can influence a developer to, if you were able to clearly articulate what you wanted, right? So, I think there's a really clear articulation emerging about the sort of character that people are wanting in different parts of the city. Do you think developers are going to be willing to work with you, or locals, or whoever's making the play, to work with you to reflect that? Or do you think you're potentially going to end in conflict situations? So that's sort of, that's a little of what do you put in guiding principles, and you think you can use the power of the pulpit and influence to be able to help shape things? Or do you end up getting caught up in, hard regulations or rules? So. Thoughts on this?
And to add to David's points too, I think one thing that we've been talking a lot as a team internally is the timing of these types of recommendations, where obviously we can put in these guiding principles now in this comprehensive plan process for the next 10 years. We can add recommendations on those action steps to move towards having that downtown feel that you want in Smithville. But what are some of the indicators that kind of come up that make it very clear of like, hey, we got to get these decisions as a community thought through, or these guidelines thought through now before something happens at the forefront, so that you're not being reactive to it. So I think the timing element and how to think about this, not just right now in this planning concept, but as Smithville moves through these next 10 years, like, are there any indicators that anyone feels makes it really important to make sure that any guidelines would be in place before something happens, or in terms of the planning process in the community too.
Yeah, thanks, Listen.
Yeah,
so really keen on thoughts. So, this is, as I said, this is just a really open exploratory discussion. We're, trying to take your pulse here and get your guidance a little. So, Mayor?
Yeah, so one thing I've looked at, and I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on, is some of the more aggressive downtown type areas, and areas wanting to keep that small town type feel in areas. They've done an overlay, and they've done a preferred business type, and the thing that the city can do is business licensing towards those types of businesses that say, in this area there's 0 body shops, there's 0 storage units, there's preferred 3 restaurants, 4 cafes, no lawyers, no insurance, because really that occupies a lot. Those types of businesses occupy a lot of our downtown space, but don't really have some place you can walk in the door to make it walkable. It doesn't add to that the small town feel of having a lawyer on the square is great when you have a courthouse, but having a lawyer on the square, or 2 lawyers buildings on the square or in your downtown when you don't have a courthouse, doesn't make as much sense.
This is a tougher one, right? To wrestle with, right? Because there's a lot of complexity in this. So additional thoughts. So, Alicia, you're involved in the downtown. Did you want to jump in, or Whitney, or David, or Carol, if you've got more thoughts? I don't know everybody here. Rebecca?
Yeah. I don't know if there's a way to say what works, because I can tell you, Nellie's is a big reason why we moved to Smithville. I walked to that, and the signage out front, the little hangover thing, it's like, this is what I want, this small town. So just something as simple as a sign really made a really big difference for our move up here. So I don't know how you tell businesses that the aesthetic and everything really brings people to Smithville, but.
Yeah, and I think we've got a lot of data, Whitney, on that people really appreciate those kind of character elements, right? And I think we understand it. And I think what we're trying to figure out is, how do we make sure what happens next is amplifying or reinforcing it, not detracting from it, right? Because we've all seen the wrong development in the wrong spot, right? And they last. Nikki, I think you wanted to jump in. Were you?
Yeah, I was just going to say, from a staff perspective, my observation is that Smithville kind of by necessity is a very patient community and is willing to wait for the right fit. So for example, downtown, I mean, we've got a big gravel lot and we've put out an RFP several times waiting for the right developer and the right project. And at least this board, and I think this community would rather wait for the right one than fill something in with the wrong solution. And really not because of planning, but for a lot of reasons, the community has waited a long time. I mean, the TIF, you know, lots of things, but that took 10 years to develop. The land around the lake, it's actually kind of a good thing now that things haven't filled in earlier because now we can get it right with the plan. So my observation is that it seems the community is willing to wait for the right development and developer.
Yeah, and so in this case, Nikki, the mechanism is that you own the land as city, right?
Yeah, and luckily, you know, for the first time probably maybe ever, this board has actually, you know, we own land and actually purchased some land a couple of years ago and is now talking about annexing key areas because we realize the value of controlling our own destiny. And that's really been, you know, that came up even in the strategic planning process and throughout the comp plan.
Sure.
Yeah, and one thing we have to remember when you think about it historically, our downtown wasn't a downtown in the traditional small town county seat, courthouse square downtown. It was for the lack of better terms, a truck stop on the Jefferson Highway. It was the first cross country highway. That's why it had 5 service stations and a car lot and some hotels. It was not built as a downtown square. So we're trying to transform something into that, you know, traditional square. I mean, the place where the Courtyard Park wasn't even a park until the late 80s, early 90s. It was a gravel car lot.
My observation and to add to that, my observation, Mayor and I have met with quite a few developers over time, and I think good developers prefer a vision of some sort. You know, obviously they want to hear flexibility in what you're saying, but honestly, the amount of developers that have been just happy walking in the door that we had a strategic plan and that we're working on a comp plan update, I mean, they're happy that you have a vision because they've all had experience of working with a community where, you know, that didn't happen up front and they got bid on the back end, or, you know, they were run out after 10 years. So I think the kinds of developers we want would want us to have some kind of a vision.
Yeah, which then, if I understand it correctly, then Nikki, that articulates really well into guiding principles in the character areas, with a little bit of kind of, okay, there are some things we just aren't going to consider, right? You know, like we have some kind of sort of safety rails on it, but that what we're really trying to do is create the guidance and allowing some creativity to come from developers as well, to be able to, you know, not necessarily time into a corner, but be able to understand what you're trying to fulfill. So you'll be comfortable with that, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, well, yeah, and Nikki and I have met with quite a few developers, but also Carol's heard it from some businesses too. When they weren't chamber members, and well, nobody's ever asked me. When we met with Curry Real Estate, who owns the shopping center Willa Fuente and all that is, they wanted to redevelop that 10 plus years ago, and were told no, we didn't want that kind of development with apartments and things there. They own all the land, they had the willingness to do it, but they didn't want to fight the battle with the residents. Now we've got kind of a different board and a different viewpoint on, you know, redeveloped shopping with connectivity and places to live.
I think it's important that we get it written up properly, because you keep referencing this board. You may not be that fortunate going forwards. I hope that doesn't change, but we're always at risk of that. So I know that's why it's very important that we get this comp plan right.
Okay, so Leslie, do we have enough from this to help us do the next stage of, as we develop up the guiding principles in the comp plan, in the character areas and so on?
Yeah, just to add in to when we think about implementation of the comp plan and what some of these tools at play are for controlling or informing decision making on aesthetics, oftentimes like what the mayor mentioned with uses, you see that controlled through zoning as a mechanism of what uses can be permitted in that downtown zone. So that could be a way of regulating the types of establishments that you want to see. You can set up design guidelines for facade and streetscape. Your streetscape, of course, is beautiful because it's all done, and probably don't need a lot of investment in that downtown core in that element, but the facades of buildings and things like signage, and setting design guidelines like color schemes or sign guidelines so that everybody has that charming feel in your facade. And then lastly, you can also look to establish architectural review boards in your downtown too for that new development that comes in. Do you have that mechanism in place of saying, okay, here is the architectural guidelines that we want to see so that we don't see another log cabin built in 2025 or a metal structure that might not be aesthetically pleasing to someone entering in from that gateway. But that review board could be another mechanism of providing that layer of information to supplement the Planning Commission and work with Planning Commission specific to that downtown guideline. I think it's interesting. So like here, I think David's point from the beginning of like, we're kind of hearing a little bit of both. Like we want to see some more guidance, but we also want to make sure we're putting in the right controls. I don't know if we really have clarity on that specific matter, but it sounds like really making sure we have that vision correct in that guiding principle area in the comp plan, and then helping lay out, here are the tools that are at play that might be appropriate to implement as the Main Street takes on more roles in the community, or as more and more developers are interested in Smithville and you work to market the community more to get those types of uses. So that's kind of my working thoughts too on how we might be able to translate some of these conversations into the actual planning document when you see that in the next, six weeks or so. David, anything else to chime in on that?
No, I think that's right. I think we wanted to just sort of go back to test this a little bit, because I think you're in that sort of pivot of a community that, like we said, it's a bit reactive. It was sort of no, or things would happen, to you're really now developing a really strong vision, and that goes with that sort of pivot goes with changing things like the amount of weight you would put on certain, or emphasis you might have in certain areas of the comprehensive plan where you may have more requirements, or you're being more assertive as a community about saying what you want to see develop and evolve. And so there is a sort of pushes up against that Midwest, we're here, we can do what we want, right? Which is what Melissa or others, or Carol, talked about in terms of people's reaction to being constrained too much. But I think what we have to keep coming back to it at the level of the comprehensive plan is, at the end of the day, this is your community, and what the comprehensive plan is really trying to articulate is what you desire for the future, and that then you want to find developers that can work with you to fulfill on what you want for yourself, because it's your place, right? So
well, back to one thing Carol and Melissa both kind of alluded to. We've been down this path before as a community, but it didn't stick to it. To Melissa's point, if we adopt this as a board, it's hard to change it at that point, right? If we start implementing these things as policy and adopt a comprehensive plan, we 5-6 years ago they did this kind of practice, but they didn't adopt anything. We were still on the 2005 comprehensive plan, so stuff was still allowed that was allowed by the 2005 comprehensive plan. So
okay,
we're not paying David money just so we can throw it in the trash when we're done.
Right. All right, so we have to change topic here, right? So we have one sort of big topic we want to spend some time on, and sort of conscious of we have about 25 minutes left. So and it's a little bit of an assimilation of what we've been doing of feedback we've heard from various task forces and the discussion topics, and it's really focused around this whole Highway 169 corridor. So we have a couple of slides of schematics we want to run through with you. So I'm going to just do the share screen thing again and get this loaded up. Right, so back to this, right? So we need to address it, right? So we want to address it in the process here, right? So Leslie, I'm going to just go through and change the slides. Can you walk us through what we've been working on here, and just let me know when you want me to change the slide.
Perfect. So especially like David said too, we've been having a lot of these conversations, not just in this task force, but in several of the other task forces. And when we think about bringing these elements all together, especially as the perception of the community, we think it's really important to also highlight this Highway 169 experience through Smithville. You have such a unique layout of a city, being the spine that everyone travels through, and really everything being oriented off of that spine. What we're hearing so far through this process too is there's really three or four key experiences that are really important to communicate as one travels through the 169 corridor through your community. Some of this is making sure that we're retaining these special moments throughout the corridor, and celebrating and preserving that character and that small town feel. It's also about setting the foundation and those guiding principles as changes occur along that Highway 169 experience, that there's some informing decision making for that. With these three areas, we have, again, that southern area, which is that from the south of the boundary up towards your downtown. In that Hospital Bluff area, we've kind of talked to about a boulevard experience where you go from a more vehicular focus scale, especially in that south area, towards that downtown experience along 169, which really starts to get into more of the pedestrian scale. You're slowing traffic down. You want traffic to turn into your downtown. Kind of these ideas of placemaking through Gateway become really important here. And then as one passes through that downtown area into the north of downtown section, you get into this beautiful rural character and open space area that we have kind of set up in the future land use map of preserving and retaining into the future. So we'll just walk through. We have like one quick slide for each of these different experiences. We started to include some of that idea of those guiding principles with those experiences based on what we've heard through the task forces and the discussion board and in conversations in the community survey. I also just threw in a few images of what's either existing in Smithville or what might the future look like. This is really just images to start to put some pictures to some words that we're using. So it's not going to necessarily look like this, obviously. But in that 169 area, we're really focused on that moment of the buffer gateway into Smithville and really preserving that green space between Kansas City and the boundary of Smithville to establish that really clear transition and potential release from Kansas City development to have that small town feel automatically. This might look like a gateway through preserving the existing green space. Yesterday, we talked about maybe enhancing that green space with more intentional landscaping to provide that feel as development occurs in that 169 South area in particular, this idea of orienting buildings perhaps behind commercial uses, having that retail frontage when appropriate. But really what's going to become very important in the next 10 years as that development occurs is that frontage and orientation of new development as it occurs and how it meets 169 so that you retain the feel that you're looking for. In this area, we're obviously scaled more towards the vehicles with the divided highway. But as we march north, and especially with 92 being improved in the coming years and more vehicular traffic along 92, maybe a secondary gateway or another moment or experience at that notion. You want to go ahead to the next slide. As we travel into downtown, in our last task force meeting, we talked about that sub-district of 169 just north of that Main Street 169 gateway. And this idea of having a more pedestrian scale or having that same energy of a downtown, but in that sub-district along 169. When you look at what new development patterns might look like, what we want to do is make sure that we provide places for people. That also helps bring in that pedestrian scale. When you see people, maybe it's providing some outdoor dining or little plaza spaces oriented off of the street. Kind of in this image, I don't know if you can see my mouse here, this one development, these 3 photos kind of all hit at that idea of the pedestrian scale, and they have that frontage along so that people can eat outside, and as you're traveling along 169, you're seeing people and you're seeing the community out there. Fronting the notion too with this gateway and in this transition areas, in the master planning efforts from the Metro Green Trails, there's a lot of trails coming into this network, and this idea of the river walk. So starting to think in shorter speeds, slower speeds, and having places for walkers and bikers to safely cross the street or interact through that gateway element. As we pass north of downtown, we get into this really beautiful landscape of the rural feel that is very important to the image of Smithville. Here we're talking about, minimizing commercial development, minimizing visible parking, encouraging additional planters or vegetated landscapes. Like you can see in this bottom larger image, there's some plantings that occurred along there that kind of gives a similar feel to the naturalized landscape in that future land use map. If anyone's taken a look at this, what we're really proposing in this north residential area is putting a lot of the housing development clustered along Eagle Parkway so that we can maintain Highway 169 as that rural character. And then lastly, I know David went over these gateways and these special moments as we talk about the character areas. We've have a lot of really deep conversations and the different snapshots. I just wanted to provide again, like this diagram that showed these pieces coming together so we can start wrapping our heads around that. Really highlighting the 2 most important moments being ultimately that entry into Smithville and that Highway 169 and Main Street intersection to get people into the downtown, with the secondary elements of what happens at 169 and 92 over the years being more and more important into the future, and then also being cognizant that there is a north boundary of Smithville. So while that character does bleed north and the surrounding land uses are very similar to what you see in Smithville, it's not quite as important right now, but keeping in the forefront of our mind too for the coming 10 years. So that's kind of big picture how these things look like and how they're being translated when we think about them cohesively as a roadmap. So just wanted to frame that to the group and start to show some of these pieces coming together. And I know it's still about 15, 20 minutes with the group. I just wanted to see if there's any thoughts or reactions to how we're thinking about that 169 corridor experience as one kind of travels through the community to make sure that we're getting that small town feel and those community character elements correct in that perception.
I have a question in this, and I've visited with Jack on this before, where we're talking about up north where it's residential. I know along 169, some of that is zoned commercial. So I'm assuming we leave it that way, but can we then, and this may be a question more for Jack and the mayor and city administrator, look at fine tuning what type of businesses go in there?
I think that was for you, Jack.
Yeah, I'm trying to come up with the word. We have a process with a conceptual overlay district that the city can do. The concern would be whether it would trigger compensation requirements by changing.
Right. I know we've talked about that before, but I'm just curious with what we're talking about here about that 169 look all the way through town and what we want where. So
sure.
I just think that's something to really think about with what we're doing here.
Yeah, the mechanism for us is the conceptual overlay district.
Yeah, and Melissa, you're talking about right up north in the north residential
Yes.
area, aren't you? The little
Yes.
pocket of commercial up there.
Right. Because we've
Yeah.
got, we've got a church right along 160. Well, we've got two churches up here along 169. And then we've got a new or I can't say business. It'll be a commercial type building. It's a foundation that's building a big office up north here by the Catholic Church.
Mhm.
So just curious of, what we want that to continue to look like up north.
No, Melissa, that question is really spot on. And when you have the comprehensive plan, that of course is a very different document than a zoning ordinance and a zoning map. And so where these things overlap is really a lot of the work that comes into play of implementing that comprehensive plan too. So it's, while we'll have things on the future land use map, it's very, very common that a future land use map, which again is a representation of what we think the community should look like if the visions are all implemented according to plan in 10 years. So in 2030, what would the land use patterns look like? That again is that visionary document that comes into play when properties want to be rezoned or subdivided. But then again, the zoning ordinance is really where the teeth are and the tool of that. So I think it ultimately goes back even to planning commission and into the board. And once this comprehensive plan is created and enacted in your community, it's really up to the planning commission to also have those conversations of, okay, well, do we really want to change our zoning, and do we want to update our zoning sometime in these 10 years so that these visions are aligned? Or are we okay with allowing some more flexibility, but making sure, okay, well, if we do allow that commercial use, which is coming in that area, are there elements like recommending that they enhance the vegetative buffer along 169, or have some sort of thresholds of, okay, we'll allow a little bit of commercial development, but the vast swath that we have in the zoning map right now might not be as applicable too. So I think your question is spot on and going to be something that I think will be answered over the coming years in addition to just this conversation. But I'm glad you brought that up, especially too for anyone that's not as familiar with how this comprehensive plan gets enacted and how do we actually create this vision.
Yeah, and actually it's a really good point, because I think why this 169 corridor experience is important to understand is that the land use map and the character areas are actually proposing to add quite a lot of commercial activity along 169, right? And we know that's going to happen. We're trying to make sure that it happens in a way that doesn't degrade the experience. So if you look at the southern character area and then the industrial character area, I mean, there's proposed, we've talked about what should face the roads and how far back it should be. Obviously the Hospital Bluff area is getting, there's developments going on there. We're proposing some additional commercial at the intersect of 169 and Main Street from downtown. So it's going to be this kind of bit of a balancing act, I think, to see that kind of activity, right, which is going to produce revenue and all those things that go with it, but find the way that it doesn't I don't know, hit you like a sledgehammer as building facades, but you maintain a lot of that sort of the experience. So I think thinking about it is good, and I think getting into sort of some conceptual renderings and things like that, and the way, Leslie, you showed those photos of where there was plantings and things like that, I think that's going to really help people understand how it could look. But I'm for sure that one of your big pitfalls is that this gets away from you and you end up driving through, blocks of development that, butt up against 169, right? And that's your road home, right? So, but do you think we're basically on the right track with this whole 169 corridor experience? Is that making sense the way we lay that out? Just, passes the straight face test. Yep, this looks like it's got some thinking behind it. Yep, lots of nodding there. Anybody think it's la la land or we're heading the wrong direction? Okay, nobody's nodding on that one. That's good, right? All right. So I think that, yes.
Is there, we came from Liberty where growth was crazy there for a while. Yeah. Long-term plan that the roads will suffice all these businesses coming in? I feel like they were kind of caught off guard, and I don't know. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it does. And so you would not believe the number of times, and I've not ever been to Liberty, right? But I feel I have, because I've read so many comments or heard so many people talk about what we don't want is that, right? And but it's certainly the concerns there, because even when we were, it's actually in some of the discussion boards, or might have been actually in one of the task force discussions, that people are concerned about, particularly what happens below 92, right? So, you know, or 92, like the council, the hospital bluff and the sort of southern areas, is that the impact of traffic, the additional, you know, on ramp, off ramp, you know, what type of property types are there? Is it bringing in trucks? You know, those type of things are really on people's minds in terms of potential impacts. And what we're trying to think through is to make sure that you don't end up with unintended consequences. So I think this sort of more detailed discussion about the property types, for example, in the industrial area, why people are getting right onto that is, you know, they're very conscious. They don't want a whole bunch of, you know, big trucks going in and out. You know, we might be able to understand having some, you know, sort of higher paying sort of technical flex sort of space, you know, which is going to be mostly vehicle, car traffic, right? But that's got a different impact to a whole bunch of trucks. So I think we're trying to work that through. And I mean, and Jack will tell you too, that any proposal that's going to come in is going to have traffic studies and things like that done with it. The challenge is, and I think that's what you're probably pointing to, Whitney, is by looking at somewhere like Liberty, is that one by one, you might have a traffic study and that's okay, but you get 100 of those stacked up and they're all okay, but 100 of them suddenly becomes a big shift, right? And I think what we're trying to lay down now is the markers for what's that endpoint look like, so you can kind of work backwards from it, right? So,
and David, if I could jump in and clarify something also,
yeah.
We have funding in our budget, at least if it is approved. We've proposed funding for the budget for next year that includes a transportation master plan. And so what we've really been doing over the last couple of years is taking a longer term vision of what we want in the community through our strategic plan, the comp plan, building on that and helping refine what we look like as a built environment, and then taking that to inform what we were talking about earlier, how we address our zoning ordinances, how we look at, there are two real key pieces that we're looking at in the coming months and over the next couple of years as well, our Parks and Recreation Master Plan and a Transportation Master Plan, all for identifying what those needs are to help us as a community create the infrastructure for that growth and development that we want to look for in the community in the way that's outlined in the comp plan, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And the really key trigger point in this too is that, you know, if you look at population in 1990, what was it? It was 1,000 people or something like in Smithville, right? And now you're 10. Well, and now you're going to add another, you know, maybe 5,000 in the next 10 years, right? So it's kind of, it's grown up time, right? It's time you have to do the work to have proper plans and think through these issues, because if you don't, you know, it'll get away from you, right? And I think, you know, Whitney pointed to the example of that. So that's why I think there's a lot of focus on really trying to think this through in the right way, because you have this point in time, right, where there's enthusiasm, you've got some resources, you know, things are going well, you've got good leadership, you know, you've got some successes like the Main Street, fabulous success. You know, everybody just raves about that, right? In terms of how proud and thrilled they are to see, you know, that, you know, sort of renewal occurring. And now you've got trails rolling out, you've got the school district that's doing really well, you know, so this is the time, I think, where you can kind of balance that, being bold, not being fearful, but being really anchored by a strong, coherent vision and, you know, sort of making it your place, right? So other comments on that, just so we only got a couple of minutes left. So is there anything you think we're missing in the discussion so far and relevant to small town feel and sense of community, right? So obviously 4 big task forces. Do you think there's anything that we're not hitting on that we need to, that's relevant to this particular topic area? Okay. All right. So Cynthia, do you think we should wrap it up there? did you want to have any final?
I think you've hit on everything, unless there's any concerns that anybody has with the discussion that we've got. But I feel like we've had good input this evening.
Yeah, great. All right, good. So thanks, Cynthia. So just to wrap it up, so next steps, right, for us, there's the discussion topics are still running, and we'll be perhaps adding a few that may come out of this week, where it's just another way for us to probe community sentiment. It's been actually, I got to say, it's just been fabulous, right, to have so much community input, right? I mean, it's, you get, I just think it's like we're really getting down to some real finesse in terms of understanding the translation between vision to reality. And the comp plan obviously is, a big part of that bridging piece. And I just want to thank you for your input in this task force for tonight. The next stage for us, obviously, as we go through this week, is we then, starting to translate that into the written document. And we have, as I said, the character area maps and the land area draft land use map and the areas of proposed change are all on the portal, right? So you can actually go in there, some really great visualization. You can scroll through the city and see where there's proposed changes, and there's character area overlays. It's all incredibly user-friendly, right? But it really, I think, helps bring to life what the sort of concepts look like on the ground. So as I said, you can go in and look at those, but you can also add comment. And if there's anything that sort of springs to mind that you think we've missed, or thoughts you have, or examples you want to point us to, feel free to, you can email through to the comp planning email address that's on the portal as well, or ring Jack. That's probably what everybody does, right? the direct line of communication. And so obviously we're going to kind of beaver away and turn this into sort of a more structured document. So just really thank you for your input. And Leslie, did you want to add anything, or Heather, just before we wrap up?
I just wanted to again chime in on, I'm sorry, David, thank you for bringing up the discussion boards, because that's a really helpful tool if there are things that you haven't discussed with us or things that we're missing. Please go use those mechanisms. Our window for input is like starting to narrow down, and we're looking at having this drafted comp plan middle of October. So we want to make sure we can get your feedback as soon as possible, and make sure that we can mindfully respond to these ideas within the comp plan too. So just to kind of add some time frame to that.
Yeah, good. And let me add to that too, Leslie, is that, we track visits to the portal, right? So we understand how many people are using it, because we're keen for that engagement. And you might look at some of the discussion topics, and there might only be, 20 or 25 comments that are there and various links, right? But I can tell you hundreds of people have gone and read them, right? Because the traffic that goes there, I mean, people are reading these, right? And you have some important voices in this community, in your roles as members of boards and planning commissions and so on, and as part of the task force. So don't feel at all shy to jump in, and you can reply to people's comments if people have asked questions. I know somebody, for example, asked a question about what's happening with the old bridge down at the Highway 162, junction with Main Street. If there's technical pieces you want to jump in and help answer people's questions, you can do that, right? It's not live. We do moderate it, so we do just check that comments are not offensive or anything like that. So you may make a post, but it may not show up until the next morning. But do feel free to have your voice in that game, because I can guarantee you, people are reading that stuff and reading it thoroughly, right? So they may, and that's that there's all sorts of people who just watch stuff but don't say anything. There's lots of watchers, right? All right, so with that, thank you very much. So we're right on time here, and we do have to go, so guys can get set up for the board meeting. Once again, thank you for your input, and we look forward to the next opportunity to engage with you. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good.